Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about how to implement a clean architecture in Android with an MVP presentation layer. Before I begin, I want to talk about a topic that at one point in my career I had absolutely no idea about, and then that software architecture and software design are separate by complementary topics. Okay, so then what is what? Well, software architecture is about the intent, about what the system does, about what we are building, while software design is about how we are building. You can consider software architecture as a higher level of abstraction than software design, and it also represents the bigger picture, the choice of frameworks, software engineering standards, high-level principles, intent, and so forth. While design represents the smaller picture, it represents how to express, how to implement, how to plan and structure your code in order to define as clearly as possible the intent of the architecture. Okay, before we dig in the dummy application that I implemented as an example, let's talk a bit about clean architecture and what it is. So, the idea is that systems based on clean architecture have the following characteristics. They have separation of concerns, they are multi-layered, they are independent of frameworks, they are independent of user interfaces, they are independent of databases, they are testable by layer, and they have a dependency rule that says that code dependencies can only point inward from lower levels like the presentation layer to higher levels like the data layer. Okay, coming back to our example application. The example application is based on a three-tier clean architecture. So this means we only have three tiers, three layers: the presentation layer, the domain layer, and the data layer. And we already mentioned the dependency rule. The dependency rule goes something like this: presentation layer, domain layer, data layer. So the presentation layer knows about the domain layer, which knows about the data layer. The data layer does not know about the domain layer, and the domain layer does not know about the presentation layer. What's an important topic here to discuss is how Gradle handles these dependencies. If you go to the presentation layer in the build Gradle, you see that the presentation layer has a dependency on the domain layer. If you go to domain layer, you'll see that it has a dependency on the data layer. And if you go to the data layer, you see that this has a dependency on the modules module. This is not a layer, it's just a module. So what's the deal then with this models module? This models module contains all the models used in the complete application. Then I did this for the sake of simplicity, and in a more complex application each layer has its own data modeling. But because of transitivity, and because the data layer depends on the models, and because the domain layer depends on the data layer which depends on the models, the domain layer will have access to these models. And it's the same from the presentation layer. If the presentation layer depends on the domain layer which depends on the data layer which depends on the models, the presentation layer will have access to the models. But I repeat, this is only for the sake of simplicity. It's better to have your own data modeling, a different data modeling in each layer. Okay, so the presentation layer represents the application, and it is an Android and tablet module, while the domain and data layer are just plain old Java libraries. Okay. So now we're gonna go through each layer and just show you an overview of the code. Really basic, will not go into many details. Okay, so the presentation layer. This is implemented as a MVP, a model view presenter design, and you'll see that the code is arranged by features. And for example, we have feature X, which represents one screen. Oh, let me show the application first. Like I said, the application is very simple. So what it does, it just makes a request. If I click this get, it will make a request. With the request will go from presentation layer, domain layer, and data layer, and the data will come back and display it on the presentation layer. And this feature X basically is this screen here. This screen here is implemented as a model view presenter. You have the view, and here you have everything implemented that handles the view, how the data is displayed. Okay, then you have the presenter. The presenter will handle everything in background and post everything on the UI thread. So this is an asynchronous implementation for the presenter. And then you have the model. You'll see here that the model is also called use cases. And why is that? Apparently, the model in an MVP can also be called use cases or interactor. And these use cases or model or interactor or whatever you want to call it represent application-specific business rules. These use cases orchestrate the flow of data between the presentation layer and the domain layer, and they are specific to the application and not the domain. You can think of them as what the application does, what the presentation layer does. Remember that a presentation layer in a clean architecture can be anything from an Android application, a web application, a standalone application, and so forth. The idea is separation of concerns. So these layers are not highly coupled. They are very decoupled. Okay, so that's about everything I can show you about the presentation layer. Like I said, I will not go into detail of how everything is implemented. The idea is to present an overview of clean architecture, an example of this of an implementation. Okay, let's go to the domain layer. The domain layer is again very basic. We just have 3 classes that handle the request that comes from the presentation layer and then return some data that is read from the data layer. That's it. And the data layer normally it should contain database implementation. In this case, we are just going to use a singleton class. So this is the database implementation. It's just a singleton class that contains some information that is showed in the UI. The point of this example was not to show you how to use a database in an application, but how to have separation of concerns. I also said that each layer can be tested independently. So if you go into each layer, into the source, you'll see we'll have this test folder, right? Test folder, and here are the tests per layer. You can run them like this. Oh, sorry. You can run them like run all tests. Yeah, it's the same here. It's the same here. The point of having tests per layer is that or the idea of clean architecture is to have separation of concerns. And in our example, the presentation layer contains everything that is Android related. The domain layer contains plain Java objects that represent the business entities, and the data layer contains everything that is database related. Also in a clean architecture, it must be possible to replace each layer with a different implementation of the same interface. This should make no difference on the other layers. So basically I can replace the presentation layer with, I don't know, a web app or a standalone desktop application, and it should work the same with the domain layer and the data layer. So yeah, just for curiosity, let's run the application. So I do a get. It's also asynchronous, and it also handles screen orientation. This was a very important and quite difficult topic to solve, difficult issue to solve. And what I want to show you now is the flow of data from when I invoke a get request. This means from how the requests go from the data layer, from the presentation layer to domain layer and data layer. Okay, So let's go to the view, feature X, yeah, we have a view, and we are going to talk about this get, right? A fruit, get this fruit. That's it. Yeah. So this is how to invoke the first request. Oh, you see here that I'm using onClick. This means that I'm using butter knife, which is an awesome library to use. Okay, so what this does? This just sends a request. This tells the presenter, hey, I request fruit 1. Then we're going to go to the presenter, and we have here fruit 1. Here I create an asynchronous task, and this means that this will execute the request in the background and will not stall the user interface. Um, yeah, you may wonder what's the purpose of this line of code. This just simulates a network latency. It's just like when you do a call on a REST API on the web. This was the whole point. So this is, yeah. Okay, so like I said, the request is executed in the background, and when the request is finished, this part on post execute will be executed on the UI thread. So this is how you post on the interface. So coming back, a request was made from the view, the request went to the presenter, request fruit 1, and now the request went to the model, right? Get fruit 1, which just gets a random fruit from the database, right? When a random fruit is read from the database, we're going to post it, we're going to come back to the presenter, and the presenter will post this on the UI. That's it. So this is how requests and posts work in this architecture. We have a request from the presentation layer, which goes on the domain layer, which goes on the data layer, then comes back on the domain layer, which processes the data, and then it shows the data on the presentation layer. It sends the data to the presentation layer, and the presenter handles how the data is shown on the presentation layer. Okay, so the conclusion is that having separation of concerns in an application might seem like a no-brainer, yet this is surprisingly difficult to achieve in complex applications. I guess the best way to start is to understand the purpose of clean architecture and just practice, implement your own examples, see examples of other people, and so forth. You can use this code of this example as a boilerplate code upon to build your own applications, because it's very simple, and in my opinion it's very reusable. It was an important topic for me to create something reusable. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found something useful in this video, and hope to see you next time. Bye.